we're going to learn how in Swing, Java Swing, the GUI environment for Java applications on the desktop, we can add controls to the screen, and in particular, we're not going to be using a layout manager. That is, we are going to explicitly say we have the position and size of each button and text box. To understand where we're going with this and my motivation for putting this out and the corresponding text and example files, please look at this PowerPoint. And remember that this concerns the GUI system for Java applications for the desktop, as opposed to developing for a web or a smartphone. Please, of course, see the corresponding example file and the text for this, the companion text that goes with this voice-animated PowerPoint lecture. To quickly understand what the example does, we start off with simply a button and a text box. When the user or whoever, or yourself if you're testing this out, click this button, it will create one more button and one more text box. So this shows you how you dynamically modify the form based upon what your user is doing. Look at this example. By the way, I am going to be using a teaching technique called Landomatics. I will be using that in a wide variety of voice-animated PowerPoints that I'm going to be putting out as part of my service activities and part of my leave in the 2020-21 academic year from Western Illinois University. I've been using this technique in teaching for since the previous century. And I'm just simply going to refer everybody here to how I'm using it and my conventions in all of these PowerPoints that concern, many of which concern programming, but not in Java and not GUI. So I'm going to give for each of these items a name, which I chose very imaginatively. And each of these will point to the entity that represents in this either the button or the text box. All the things that we can put on a screen such as this one, buttons, text boxes, labels, combo boxes, and some of the fancier types of things are generally known as controls. In Java Swing, there's a bunch of names. I'm not going to go into the details of how each one works in this set of slides. But you have to look up which one you're going to use. These two are buttons, and the Java Swing type of thing for them. So these two are given this type of Java Swing item. I'm not going to, in this set of slides, go into the details of these, but I do want to note that the ones that are defined by Swing will generally begin with this letter, and other items that may pertain to the windows are defined in something called the AWT, or Abstract Window Toolkit, and actually Swing was built on top of the AWT. And these two objects here are going to be these text boxes, and and we end up just simply defining them with the standard code over here. And remember, we just simply write the control type and the variable. I happen to like to use a simple main method and with a simple object, so essentially to keep Java happy, I declare everything static. When you go to to the TFD document that I've described elsewhere, this is step 1. So I define a set of steps for getting a control properly on the screen. This is the first one, the Java declaration. Then, as you know, for each of these, we have to do the standard Java new. And without further ado, this is for the two that will appear at the beginning, and this is for the two that appear when you click the button. I happen to define all of them in. I happen to do all of this in the main program, even though 2 and 4 will not actually appear until the action performed for this button. More on that later. Now we are responsible for setting the size. As we don't have a layout manager, we do that ourselves. This is the syntax to do it, but it's very, very straightforward. You call this method. These two numbers, I believe, are in pixels. So without further ado, we end up writing for these two statements. So they have a width of this value and a height of this value. And as before, we're going to put all of these statements in the main, even though these two will only appear later when the button is clicked. Now the astute reader will observe that all of these sizes are the same. All 4 of the controls are of the identical width and height or shape. Now, they probably know from good software engineering that you want to do that in one place so that if we decide that all of these buttons are really the kind of the same thing and we'd like them all to be a little larger or a little smaller or a little narrower, we can do that in one place and have all 4 buttons change identically. The syntax for doing that is fairly straightforward. We use this built-in Java class to contain these two numbers and then apply it. This method will take a dimension as well. So this ends up looking like this. So this is the same width and height that we observed was the same. And then we can apply this method to all 4 of these cases. The location really isn't of any further ado. Do remember that this number here is the position from the top, not the bottom, as you learned in when you were learning how to graph stuff in your algebra class way back when. So we do that. The astute observer will note that these are all the same distance, and we put this number. There's obviously no reason we couldn't make this some sort of a constant so that we could change it all in one place to scoot them over a little bit differently. But regardless, then we do these two. Again, I have decided to do all of this in the main, even though these two things will not become visible until this button is clicked, i.e. making them visible will happen, guess what, in the next slide. To add an item, to make it actually become part of the window, as opposed to some disembodied set of bytes sitting out there with a pointer to it. We need to use this syntax. This would be presumably the name of a J-frame or something similar. I'm not going to get into the details of root panes and stuff like that. I think in some of the later Javas you can actually leave this out, and then you just simply add it. But for some of them, it will happen, not these two. These two will be added at the beginning. But for these two, it will happen in here. And there's actually an action performed method in here. That's what executes the code when this button is clicked, and therefore these two things will only appear when the button is appears rather than at the beginning of the program. So these two lines here will be in here someplace, and that's different from steps 1 through 4. Thus, these two lines over here really are going to be in here. So, one thing I also have to add is that I discovered that you need this. If you leave this out, then even though they are added to the window, the window doesn't get redrawn with that new information, and the person doesn't actually see the button and text box appear.